Read Smart, the Baillie Gifford Prize podcast. This podcast is generously sponsored by the Blavatnik Family Foundation. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin. Welcome to everyone joining us today on Read Smart, the official podcast for the Baillie Gifford Prize for Non-Fiction. Over the coming weeks, we're delighted to be speaking with all 6 of this year's shortlisted authors. Join us as we discuss their extraordinary books and uncover the inspirations behind their chosen topics. I'm very excited to be joined today by Sue Prideaux, who's author of Wild Thing, A Life of Paul Gauguin. Prideaux is an acclaimed biographer whose works have garnered numerous prestigious awards. Her biography of Edvard Munch won the James Tait Black Memorial Prize in 2005. Her book on Strindberg won the Duff Cooper Prize in 2012, and her biography of Nietzsche, Am Dynamite, received the Hawthornden Prize and was named the Times Biography of the Year in 2018. Wild Thing paints a vivid portrait of Paul Gauguin, an artist whose life was as colourful and tumultuous as his canvases. From his privileged beginnings in Peru to his rebellious escapades in France and the electrifying Paris art scene, Prideaux paints a picture of artistic freedom, offering a fresh, nuanced view of Gauguin, celebrating his creative genius while not shying away from his imperfections. Sue, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Georgina.
What inspired you to write about Paul Gauguin after your biographies of Nietzsche, Munch and Strindberg?
It came as a surprise to me, really, but I found myself with a bit of a moral problem. In 2019, the National Gallery put on an exhibition of Gauguin's portraits, and really all hell was unleashed. Huge reaction. Gauguin was a paedophile who spread syphilis throughout the South Seas. He should be cancelled. His paintings should probably be burnt. And I'd always loved his pictures. You know, coming out of writing about Nietzsche, you know, you can't use the lazy old excuse of loving the pictures but hating the man. So I thought, well, I'd better set about researching. And then, of course, I discovered things that became the book. I mean, the easy thing was to discover, you know, about the underage girls. And, of course, you know, step one, look at the age of consent around the world at the time. And in France and the colonies at the time, we're talking 1890, it was 13 throughout France and the colonies. And that's pretty general for 1890. I mean, in the United States, it varied between 10 and 12, except in the state of Delaware, where it was 7. So, I mean, the whole thing is totally disgusting. But if you look at Gauguin within the context of his age, he was doing nothing illegal, nor, I'm afraid, was he doing anything at all unusual. As a little postscript, last June, when I was finishing writing the book, Japan raised the age from 13. Terrible things to find out, but, you know, those were the facts. And so then the syphilis. And delving into that, in 2018, I found an article in a scientific journal called Anthropol, and 4 of Gauguin's teeth had been found. They'd been verified by the Human Genome Project at Cambridge, you know, all proper labs. Anyway, they were analysed, and there was no evidence of syphilis found. So I thought, my gosh, well, you know, there hasn't been a biography for 30 years. And if I found these 2 things, well, you know, what else am I going to find?
What else did you find? What were some of the key moments in his artistic journey?
Well, what else did I find? I was lucky because in 2021, the catalogue raisonné of his work was completed, you know, and that's the Bible. It tells you everything about the works. So that was a lot of new material. And then in 2021, he had spent the last couple of years writing his memoir, a manuscript called Avant et Après. And it's a 200-page book of his recollections, his belief in God, art, etc., beautifully illustrated, as you can imagine. And it disappeared quite soon after his death. Then suddenly, in 2021, it reappeared, offered to the British government in lieu of death duties, and went to the Courtauld Institute. And they were fantastic. They allowed me full access, full quoting, full everything. So really I had so much new material, you know, I had no excuse not to go ahead.
I wonder how you think Gauguin's work has influenced modern art.
Well, yes, indeed. Once he stopped being an impressionist he got lots of followers at the time. I mean, Matisse was one of his early followers, and his conceptual approach, his stylistic simplification, and non-literal use of colour. He started breaking rules, really. He abandoned the traditional 3D perspective picture box, using multiple point perspective. And unlike the Impressionists, who he had sort of started with, he started using colour emotionally rather than realistically. The other thing he did was he wanted to show both real space and imagined space in the same painting. For instance, in a picture of his son, Clovis, asleep, he's got the child asleep, but above his head, sort of almost on the wallpaper, are these terrifying sort of dream figures. So he's doing, real and imagined space. So that was a breakthrough. That, of course, inspired the Surrealists. I mean, he inspired Matisse, Bonnard, Edvard Munch, Van Gogh, of course, who he painted with for 9 weeks. And his Polynesian pieces led Picasso to explore African art, leading to Cubism. It's a huge legacy. Peter Doig is very influenced by him today.
And I wonder how those techniques that you describe evolved throughout his career.
He's an interesting artist because he didn't actually pick up a brush until he was 25. And that's in 1874 when the first Impressionist exhibition was held. And what he did was he bought Impressionist pictures, sort of Degas, Cézanne, Manet, actually. And, in the evenings and on weekends, he copied them. And that was how he taught himself to paint. But then, within 4 years, he'd had a picture accepted at the Academy, and he was exhibiting with the Impressionists in their exhibitions. So rather extraordinary, really. And then 1882, 83, there was a financial crash. Gauguin lost his job, his wife, his money, everything. So he went down to Brittany because it was kind of the cheapest place in France. And there, I think, away from the hothouse of Paris, he stopped copying the Impressionists. He started breaking the rules that I was telling you about.
Speaking of breaking the rules, we've discussed his relationship with women. I wonder how the political and social climate of the late 19th century influenced his work and decisions beyond that, particularly perhaps his relationship with colonialism.
Well, I think it's vital to know about Gauguin that he spent his first 7 years in Peru. That was where he grew up till he was 7. And then his mother thought, actually, he better learn to read and write, and took him back to France, to Orléans. And he absolutely hated it. He had to wear shoes, school uniform. He couldn't speak French. He was teased and he was bullied. And he put up his fists and he said, "I'm a wild thing from Peru." Got into fights. And that was really, he was a misfit from then on. At the time, France was, a place of galloping capitalism and galloping industrialization. He called Paris the city of gold, not in a good way, not as a compliment. And he saw factories as an affront to humanity, to human dignity. And he hated mass production. He saw that as an affront to art. So really all the rest of his life, he defined himself as a wild thing from Peru, sort of rebelling against domestication, and so on and so forth. Eventually, he went out to Tahiti. In fact, he was appointed the first French official artist there. Absolutely horrified what he found. A large French force of sort of 400 people oppressing the people. So Gauguin moved out of the French colony, lived with the Polynesians as a Polynesian, and he took to political journalism, fighting for the rights of the indigenous people. He wrote stuff in newspapers, but he also wrote to the authorities in Paris, detailing the corruption and injustice, and naming names and attacking the French administration of the islands. And as a result, the governor of Tahiti brought a libel case against him. Gauguin knew that he couldn't possibly win in the corrupt court. So he fled Tahiti to a tiny island called Hiva-Oa, which was also a French colony, where when he arrived, he was greeted as a celebrity. not for his paintings, but for his journalism, for his crusading of the rights of the indigenous people. And on he carried on fighting their cause, and in the press and in the courts. And they made him a blood brother, and they loved him, and the French hated him. So, I mean, as I said at the start, the accusation of colonialism simply doesn't stand up.
I mean, it seems to me that you yourself have been on a crusade and really rescued the reputation of this man. I mean, how do you view him personally as an artist and a person after having spent so much time really getting inside his life?
Well, I mean, as an artist, it's been a great privilege to study his art for 4 years. He's even better than I thought, and even more original than I thought, which is all rather wonderful. As a person, well, restless, adventurous, brave, foolhardy. He really didn't like the Europe he met at the age of 7, or the values it was imposing on its colonies around the world. I think that's a key. A man of integrity, according to his own eccentric rules, human and vulnerable, actually probably quite frightening if you didn't measure up to his ideals, I should think.
And what about for you, sort of being inside his head for 4 years? I wonder how that affected your own life and what challenges you faced while writing the biography.
Well, I mean, lockdown was a nightmare. I think we signed the contract the day before lockdown happened. But it made me discover how many marvellous archives are actually now online. Though, of course, I far prefer to be physically in a library where you can, look around all the books and, come across stuff by happenstance. But I could get on, and, of course, eventually the curfew was lifted and I managed to get out to Polynesia, which was great.
Excellent. Sue, thank you so much for joining us. The book is just an amazing piece of research and really brings this man to life for all of us. So thank you. That's Sue Prideaux there, who's author of the shortlisted book, Wild Thing, A Life of Paul Gauguin.
Thanks.
And again, we'd like to thank the Blavatnik Family Foundation for its continued generous support of this podcast. The winner will be announced on Tuesday, the 19th of November, at an award ceremony generously supported by the Blavatnik Family Foundation. The announcement will also be live streamed across the Baillie Gifford Prize for Nonfiction social channels. And if you're interested in finding out more about the shortlisted books, you can visit our website or follow us on X, Facebook, Instagram and TikTok at BG Prize. Thank you for listening. Until next time. Read Smart, the Baillie Gifford Prize podcast. This podcast is generously sponsored by the Blavatnik Family Foundation.